What's up, everybody? This is Alex Christopher with the Duran, and I'm here with Alexander McCurse, editor-in-chief of the Duran, and today we're going to be taking a look at DNC election meddling in Alabama. Alexander, we finally do have evidence of election meddling, and we actually do have evidence of Russian bots. But the Russian bots are fake, and the election meddling was done on behalf of the DNC, the Democrats, and a very wealthy LinkedIn founder who funded the operation. What's going on here? Because this is a huge story that before we aired, we were talking about how the New York Times broke it, or I mentioned that it seems that the New York Times might have exposed a lot of it, but you have a different theory as to what's going on. So what's your take on all of this?
Well, first of all, let's talk about the story itself, because I do think it's huge. If we go back last year, there was this very fraught Senate race in Alabama. Jeff Sessions became Attorney General. That left the seat vacant, the Senate seat vacant, his Senate seat vacant. Judge Roy Moore, this rather controversial and colorful local politician and judge, was the Republicans' candidate. The Democrats threw absolutely everything they had against him, and he lost. And now that we have found out a bit more, it seems that there was a sort of dirty tricks operation against him being run by a group of people, rather techie, Democrat-leaning people who understand how to do these things. And very interestingly, they're also a same group of people who were doing a report to the Senate on the activities of Russians in social media and how they swung, supposedly, the election, the 2016 election, to Donald Trump. Anyway, they were involved during this Alabama race, in setting up all kinds of Facebook pages and tweets and social media activity, which seems to have been designed to do two things. One was to alienate some Republicans from Roy Moore by casting Roy Moore as being somebody who the Russians were backing. And the second thing was, apparently, so far as I can judge, to delegitimize Roy Moore if he won the Senate race by suggesting that it was all done by Russian bots. And in fact, I before our program, I sent you an article by Mother Jones, which was apparently written during the election, which actually said that the Russians were backing Roy Moore, citing this very activity. Now, as I said, we know now that all this social media activity was fake, that it cost around $100,000, that the official line is that it failed and that it had no appreciable effect on the Senate race whatsoever. I wonder whether Roy Moore himself and his campaign thinks all of that. And we have the New York Times publishing the story, playing it down as hard as it can. And my own view is that the reason why they have published this story in the way they have is because I think that they are concerned that Roy Moore's campaign were investigating this thing and were looking into it and were themselves going to come out and were going to say that the Democrats were in fact behind this fake Russian bot, these fake Russian bots and social media activity that appeared to be supporting Roy Moore, but in fact, as we now know, was undermining him. Now, it seems to me this is a huge story. It begs lots and lots of questions as to what exactly is going on. The people who are behind it are claiming that they were running some sort of small experiment, which I find difficult to believe. The New York Times suggests that there's some sort of race to the bottom. It accepts that there is some sort of something unethical in all of this, but suggests that it's pioneered this kind of activity and now everybody's copying them. I think something an awful lot more sinister was going on, bearing in mind, as I said, that the people who carried out this scam were in fact providing reports to the Senate and, in fact, to Democrat-controlled senators, and were very clearly associated with the Democratic Party.
So you believe the New York Times was actually providing cover for the Democrats, the DNC, their dirty tricks in getting Roy Moore out of the running for this seat in Alabama. And if that's the case, and this is kind of a rhetorical question, but I want you to dig into it a little, why is there not a special counsel called to investigate what was going on? Because this is real election meddling. And these guys that had this company, New Knowledge, is the name of this company, these guys that were running this company, these guys are former NSA guys, they're former government officials, they're former spooks, spies, call them what you want. But these guys are part of, the permanent state, the deep state, what the establishment, whatever you want to call it. So you have these guys in on it. You have the DNC running fake Russian bots to dismantle Roy Moore's campaign. You have Reid Hoffman, a super liberal, wealthy founder of LinkedIn, funding this operation. Where's the special counsel?
Well, that's a very good question, because, of course, Robert Mueller, the special counsel who's investigating Russiagate, has issued an indictment against a Russian company that carried out a social media activity, supposedly during the 2016 election, supposedly in order to swing that election. I should say there are many, many people, increasing numbers of people, who are doubting whether that is what that Russian company was in fact doing. And Robert Mueller is finding it very difficult to get his legal case together in a very toughly fought out case that's ongoing at the moment between that company and the special counsel. But anyway, he did bring charges. And why, given that these people seem to be doing much the same thing, is nobody really looking into them? Now, I accept that Robert Mueller and the Democrats will no doubt say that Mueller's indictment is not about these people running bots and social media activity, but about the deceptions that they were involved in, theft of identities and things of that kind, and that those are criminal offences. But how do we know that no criminal offences have been committed in this case if no one is investigating it? And there is a very strong likelihood, it seems to me, that some criminal offences have been committed, because let us be very clear about it, this whole thing was a deception. It was done, it was a fake flag operation, and that involves a deception. And where there is a deception like that during an election, one suspects crime.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Facebook has banned the accounts of some of these guys in New Knowledge that were behind this. We have an article that you sent me from Aaron Mate of The Nation, and he even put some logic to the framework of this discussion, in that he raises the premise saying that, okay, a lot of Democrats, a lot of DNC officials, people in New Knowledge have come out with a statement saying that this was just a test run. They were just playing around with the software, and really $100,000 spent on doing this social media Russian bot kind of trial run is not enough to sway an election the size of Alabama's. So get into the logic then of how $4,700 in Facebook ads are enough by a Russian troll farm in St. Petersburg are enough to sway a multi-billion-dollar election of the United States.
Well, Aaron Mate has done an absolutely brilliant article, and congratulations to him. And I think I think you're going to provide a link to it, and I think people should read it, because, of course, he is making an absolutely a proper point. First of all, the Russian social media activity during the presidential election, and some of it, by the way, after the 2016 presidential election, looks innocuous and doesn't seem to have been election related at all. But most of it wasn't. And secondly, the sums of money involved that was spent on it was significantly less than those which were spent on this Alabama operation. Yet we are supposed to believe that the Russian activity swung the presidential election to Donald Trump, despite the fact that many billions of dollars was spent during that election. And yet this operation in Alabama, which seems to have cost considerably more than the alleged Russian operation, and which, to be absolutely clear, was focused on the Alabama election, that supposedly had no effect on the Alabama election, even though it was a far smaller electorate and only I think it was $50 million was spent in that election. So, I mean, there is no logic there. I mean, that makes no logical sense whatsoever. What this episode has done, amongst other things, is that it has shown that the claims about that Russian social media operation swinging the presidential election to Donald Trump simply cannot be true. It's a load of nonsense. We've been saying it's nonsense right the way through, and thanks to the Democrats and to this group of people who run this operation in Alabama, we can say it. We can prove it now. Now, having said that, I must qualify this by saying that I am not convinced that this thing was quite as innocuous as people say, or some people say. As I said, I think my own personal view is that it wasn't intended to swing the election away from Roy Moore, though who knows, it might have done. What I think it was intended to do was to discredit him and to delegitimize his win after he won it.
But it actually worked so that it lost the campaign for him in a way. I mean, or at least it played a pivotal role in helping him lose that campaign.
So it seems,
I mean, and it was a tight race. Just to qualify it a little bit more, it was a tight race. And the funny part about that race is that the accusations level against Roy Moore, no one's really even talking about those accusations anymore. All in the midst of the Me Too movement and everything, and those accusations have kind of just, faded away into the media, black hole, so to speak. So, it seems that Roy Moore has kind of, really got shafted in a big way here by the Democrats, by the DNC, and by this software, social media kind of, deep state establishment kind of company that was behind the whole thing. What can Roy Moore do?
Well, indeed,
Trump let this thing die.
Well, what can Roy Moore do, and what can Donald Trump do? Now, I think in Donald Trump's case, I think he should be making a stink about this, and I think he should be asking the Justice Department to investigate it, because bluntly, this looks like illicit meddling in an election. Now, I mean, all sorts of, let's not be naive. Lots of dirty tricks happen in the United States in elections. All campaigns get involved in all sorts of things. But I come back to what I said. This looks like not just dirty tricks, but straightforward dishonesty, and probably, as I said, I mean, very likely, criminal offences were committed along the way. I mean, I think that's highly likely, actually. Now, I'm also going to say something else, which is, of course, when people say, well, it didn't have any effect on the election, how do we know if nobody's investigating it properly? If it had no effect on the election, or if it was not the cause of Roy Moore losing, then the Russian operation, such as it was, much smaller, less organized, less coherent, cannot have played any role in Hillary Clinton losing and Donald Trump winning. But as I said, I come back to this. This operation in Alabama was bigger proportionately than the alleged Russian one, and it was focused on the election in the way that Russian one, to the extent that it existed, doesn't seem to have been, if that wasn't. So how can we say this? It did Roy Moore. As you said, it was a very tight election. There was lots of talk about Russian interference before that election and during that election in relation to Donald Trump's victory. It's entirely possible, it seems to me, that it might have affected some swing voters in a conservative, patriotic state like Alabama, who might have looked at all this activity on social media and read those articles in Mother Jones and picked up on all the Twitter activity, talking and discussing the involvement of those Russian bots, and may have said, well, I'm a patriotic American. I'm not going to vote for Roy Moore because Russia backs him. So quite possibly it worked.
Should the Democrat Party and the DNC, given this revelation, given the fact that they rigged the primary against Bernie Sanders, now that's pretty much accepted, common knowledge. It is
universally accepted.
It's universally accepted.
It's not disputed. I mean, this is what's extraordinary about it.
This is safe to say that this is also universally accepted, given that the New York Times pretty much admitted to it, even though they were running cover for the DNC. They admitted to some improprieties taking place. Should the Democrat Party and the DNC be investigated on what they're doing? Because I think this is just getting way out of control.
Well, of course it is. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, when you say that this is, indisputable, of course it is indisputable. One of the individuals who was involved in this activity, I think his name is Morgan, says, well, he didn't actually know anything about it, which is a weak denial. But everybody else is involved admits that it happened. And it clearly did happen. There's no question about it. So if it happened, obviously it should be investigated. Obviously we should find out whether any crimes were committed. And even if no crimes were committed, we should know an awful lot more about how it was funded, who suggested it, what sort of connections were made. This is an election for the Senate, a seat in the Senate of the United States, one of the most powerful parts of the US Congress. I mean, this is not a small or minor election. This is a huge affair. If that election was stolen as a result of this meddling, which it might have been, I mean, firstly, we need to know, and we need to know by whom and how. But nobody seems to be doing anything about it. There seems to be no question of any kind of investigation. Donald Trump, to my amazement, is not tweeting about it or saying anything. And as I said, we've only had a few comments here and there in one or two places, the article in the New York Times that you mentioned, and one or two comments elsewhere. But certainly it should be investigated. Certainly the DNC should be investigated. Certainly all the Democrats should be asked very serious questions. They're not being, and that is bad.
Yeah, why can't we say, Alexander, to close out the video, why can't we say that maybe this new knowledge company, maybe the DNC, was behind a lot of these, Russian bots that Mueller says he's found, and that Facebook said they found, and that Twitter said they found, and Google said they found? Why not? Why is that not an impossibility given this evidence?
Alex, you're absolutely right. In fact, you read my mind, because I've been reading all this story. I've been thinking exactly that. Let us remember, when there was all that story about, the DNC and Podesta emails being leaked, there was talk about the Russians having leaked them. There was talk before about the Russians having Hillary Clinton's emails, the ones that she used a private server for. All of that was going on. All of that was already going on. So the idea of Russian bots and of Russian interference and Russian meddling in the election was around during the election itself. So it is entirely possible that some people sympathetic to Hillary Clinton and to the Democrats might have been involved in fabricating some of this alleged Russian social media activity during the election, and then try to use it in order to cast even further doubts on the legitimacy of Trump's victory. And now that we have seen what happened in Alabama, that is a very, the reasons for thinking that are even stronger. Of course, we need to investigate more. We need to know exactly what happened. I mean, if that Russian social media activity the alleged Russian social media activity had no connection to the Democrats, we need to know. If it did have a connection to the Democrats, and this episode in Alabama might make us think that it did or might have done, then we also need to know And the way we're going to find out one way or another is through an investigation. And that's why there needs to be an investigation into this thing. And it's astonishing that nobody is proposing it.
What an embarrassment for the DNC. What an embarrassment for the Democrats. What an embarrassment for Mueller, for all these people promoting the Russia collusion, Trump-Russia collusion witch hunt. It's just a complete embarrassment.
It's a huge embarrassment. And let's not forget the Democrats in Congress, Adam Schiff, the New York Times itself, the Washington Post, MSNBC, CNN. And notice how, with the exception of the New York Times, they're all silent about this story. Yeah. I mean, that's a reflection of how embarrassed they are. But, I mean, the embarrassment of the Democrats and the media and Mueller and all the rest is understandable, and their silence is understandable. I think the Republicans, not for the first time, need to get their act together and start talking out. Roy Moore, first and foremost.
Yeah, their silence says a lot. And, all you can hope for right now is that the one-man media machine, which is Donald Trump with that massive social media following, he's probably the only one at this point in time, him and Fox News maybe, that in the mainstream, that could actually really, push some momentum behind this story. So I guess we may be waiting for a couple of Trump tweets on this. Who knows?
Who knows, indeed. If so, be assured, our viewers should be assured, we shall be following it.
That's right. Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of The Duran. Thank you very much, guys. If you like this video, click on the subscribe button down below and click on that notifications bell to get notifications every time we push out a new video. And remember to visit the Duran shop, pick up a t-shirt, help support the Duran. And in the description box, you'll find links to our PayPal and Patreon page. Donate to the Duran. It really helps us out a lot. You can get this show in iTunes and SoundCloud audio format. And of course, you can read all the articles that Alexander Mercouris reads and follows by going to theduran.com, the website. Alexander links those articles on a daily basis. He puts 5, 6, 7 links of what he's reading in the news so you can stay up to date and read what Alexander reads. Guys, thank you very much. Until next time, take care.